welcome Miss June Foray to the Saturday Morning Marquee. June was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, and already by the time she was 15, she was appearing as a regular at Springfield's radio station WBZA. And 2 years after that, she was whisked off to L.A. in hopes of making it as a star. Her hopes came true, and by age 19, June was writing and creating radio for kids. A natural, she worked with big names like Danny Thomas and Jimmy Durante. Soon, June went really big time and made it in the movies. Today, she's also known as the female Mel Blanc for all of her vocal talents. Here's just some of the parts that she's lent her voice to. For Chuck Jones and Warner Brothers, she played the character of Granny in the Tweety and Sylvester cartoon series. She was the mermaid in Peter Pan, Lucifer the cat in Cinderella. You might know her even more for her work on the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, where she played Natasha, Rocky the Squirrel, and many of the other characters. She's also lent her vocal talents to the Gummy Bears, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, DuckTales, Garfield, the Flintstones, and several other characters for cartoon series. This morning, I'd like to introduce to you June Foray, and thank you, June, for joining me on the Saturday Morning Marquee.
Well, how thoughtful of you to call me. I appreciate that, Hillary.
Well, you know, every generation, I think since about the 40s, has had a major cartoon character associated with pop culture that you've lent your voice to. I mean, I just went through a whole list. There's several others. Of course, you know, we mentioned Rocky on Bullwinkle, you know, Looney Tunes, the Smurfs, Garfield, and right up until recently with Disney films such as Mulan. What is it like for you to know that you've been such a major part of all of these generations playing all these characters?
Well, it's very flattering because I never had to audition for any of them. And I just feel so fortunate that my mother and father gave me this inheritance, really, because I think it's inherent in you to be able to do things like that. And, you know, when people call me legendary and an icon, I'm almost embarrassed because that's the only thing I knew how to do. Where would I get a job any other place?
Well, what did you mean that you didn't have to audition for many of them? I mean, were they just, you know, did people just think of you eventually after, you know, they knew of your talent?
I think that was it, especially Rocky and Bullwinkle. My agent had called one day and said, there's a man who'd like to meet you. He wants to take you to lunch. He has an idea about a series. And I had lunch with Jay Ward and Bill Scott, who produced the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. And we had lunch, and we did a demo the following week, and then we waited a whole year, and I thought, well, my gosh, you know, you do so many demos in Hollywood, it never ends in anything successful. Right. But this did, and now a year later, by golly, they called and said, we're ready to go, and that's what started this sophisticated, witty, wonderful show. It's out on DVDs now, you know.
Oh, it is?
Yes, the first 26 weeks they have The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, they have Aesop's Fables, they have Dudley Do-Right, and you know, all the fractured fairy tales, you know, where I was a princess, and all fairy godmothers and the witches, and it's just as topical today as it was when we did it in the 60s.
Well, did many people know at the time that you were not only the little squirrel Rocky and, of course, Natasha, but several of the other characters, you know, on that series? Was that, first of all, was that unusual to play different voices for one show? And did people know that you played all those parts?
I presume that they did. I know they know now.
Right.
But I don't know if they did then. But, you know, there was no condescension to children on the Rock and Bullwinkle. It was witty, mordantly so, and the puns on the end were so hilarious, and the kids didn't know what their mothers and fathers were laughing at, you know. But now that they're older, they're imbued with this love of what they saw when they were kids.
Well, Rocky and Bullwinkle, obviously a huge part of your career, but really only just a part of your career. I mean, your career has extended. I mean, you've done so much voice work.
You know, I owe a lot to Chuck Jones, too, because I was I was Lucifer the cat in Cinderella. I was only a young kid. He didn't have any dialogue, just the mean growls.
Mm-hmm.
But I was working for Walt Disney, and my God, what a fantastic coup that was.
Well, explain a little bit more to me. I mean, did they create the sounds of Lucifer just to involve you in the film, or how really did you become a part of that and introduced to Walt Disney?
Well, I really don't know. I had been doing radio shows. I had been working with Steve Allen for a couple of years on radio every day, and I did so many funny characters, and then Capitol Records put me under contract, put me and Stan Freberg, Dawes Butler, and Mel Blanc under contract to do all their children's shows, and a lot of them were Disney and Warner shorts, because at that time, neither Disney or Warner's had record companies, and so I did princesses and witches and fairy godmothers. I did all these characters, and I guess that's how it all started.
And, of course, you found a niche at the Disney Studios. I mean, just recently I mentioned you were part of their film Mulan, which took place in the 90s. You were also in Peter Pan. And then, of course, the series The Gummy Bears.
Yeah.
What was it? I mean, obviously, I know it was great working for Disney, but how was that for you throughout your career? Did anything change there? Or, you know,
at Disney?
Yeah.
You know, it's a funny thing, and I've always felt so bad about this, because I did Witch Hazel over there.
Mm-hmm.
And but of all the things I did at Disney, I never met him, and I felt so bad. And he was the one who told people to hire me because he admired my work. But I never met Walt Disney.
How come you didn't get the chance to?
I don't know. I just don't know. But anyway, I did Witch Hazel for him in Trick or Treat, and my agent called in the middle 50s and said, would you like to work at Warner Brothers tomorrow? And I said, boy, would I? And they said, well, you'll be working for Chuck. And I said, Chuck who? And he said, Chuck Jones. He creates, some of the Bugs Bunny shorts. And I said, well, I know Bugs Bunny, but I don't know Chuck Jones. And
I mean, you were just a kid at the time.
Yeah. And, I was starting to work in radio, and so I really didn't have a chance to look at cartoons,
mm-hmm.
and to go to the theater, because television really didn't come in until the early 50s, I don't think. I don't know. But anyway, Chuck brought me over to do Witch Hazel over there. Anything that Chuck ever did, I did. Cindy Lou Who in The Grinch, you've probably seen it this year again.
Well, I have to be honest with you. I'm Hillary Kogan speaking with June Foray, the Saturday Morning Marquee. And June, I have to be honest with you. I'm starting, to gear up for our holiday programming here and looking for holiday entertainers. I just recently interviewed the voice of Rudolph, Billy May Richards. And the reason why I started doing research and found your name was because first I was looking at Frosty the Snowman. I believe you were the school teacher in that film, which of course is a classic holiday film now. And then I also found out, along with the other lists of work you've been involved with, you were the voice of Cindy Lou Who in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, but I read that you didn't receive any credit for that.
No, I didn't, which is, everybody knows that I did,
mm-hmm.
but I am amazed because Chuck always gave me credit for anything, but he gave me credit on everything else, at Cricket in Times Square, Rikki Tikki Tavi, Horton Hears a Who, oh gosh, Phantom Toll Booth, anything that Chuck did, I always got credit.
Definitely launching your career.
Yes,
and then of course, I mean, you teamed up with Mel Blanc, the voice of all voices of male characters, and you're kind of sometimes referred to as the female Mel Blanc. What is that like for you to be referred to in that way?
Well, Chuck always said that, and it amused me because Chuck loved Mel and hired him all the time, of course. But Chuck also admired my work, and so I felt very flattered.
Well, what was Mel Blanc like as a person and to work with him?
He was very funny, a charming man.
I hate to go back in your career, but I would like to start a little bit at the beginning. I mean, we've definitely talked about already the characters and some of the characters that you voiced for major cartoons, movies, and films, but I want to know, first of all, you had said that if you weren't doing this now, you don't know what you would be doing with your life because you started this at such a young age, but how did you really get involved first at that Springfield radio station? And, did you just happen to stumble upon this by chance, or did you know at an early age, radio is probably something I'm interested in? I mean, you were just a teenager at the time, still in high school, probably.
Well, yes, I was, but my mother and father were most supportive of me, and so I told them when I was 6 years old I wanted to be an actress. They would take us us kids to the theater and movies, and I would come home and impersonate them. And I was also an omnivorous reader, and I would read, and as I read stories, I would do the voices of the characters that I read. So Mother and Dad hired a couple of teachers. They called them elocution teachers at the time. And one of my teachers had a radio show, and so I was on her show when I was 12 years old on WBZA in Springfield. And then at that time, I met the director who had a stock company of people, and I had the hubris to go to him and say, "May I be on your show?" And I did a couple of voices for them, and so I did their show, the WBZA Players.
Were you nervous from that point? I mean, moving out to Los Angeles and then trying to make it in films and really go big time with this career at such a young age?
Well, I wasn't nervous because I was with my mother and father and brother and sister, and but I knew what I wanted to do. And then when I was 18 or 19, I started writing children's stories. I called myself Lady Make-Believe, and it was a 15-minute show, and I was on a local radio station here, and that went on for a couple of years. In radio, you just tackle directors by sitting in the lobby at CBS or NBC and saying, "Hey, look, I could do this or I could do that."
Yeah, it must be a much different world. I mean, I know it is than it is now for actors trying to make it in Hollywood.
Yes, I guess it is. I'm so lucky, Hillary, because I guess I was the firstest with the mostest, as they say,
Yeah.
And there weren't many young women who could do different voices.
I'm Hillary Kogan. You are listening to your entertainment program, the Saturday Morning Marquee on WNTK Talk Radio 99.7 FM. This morning, I am interviewing in my spotlight Miss June Foray. You probably know her best for her voice work on the cartoon series Rocky and Bullwinkle, where she played not only Natasha but also Rocky. She's done tons of work for the Disney studios. She also teamed up with Chuck Jones and Mel Blanc for the Looney Tunes cartoons and several other cartoon series coming out of Chuck Jones. She was the voice of Cindy Lou Who in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. Also can be heard as a school teacher in Frosty the Snowman. She's also been involved with the Smurfs, Garfield, DuckTales, Gummy Bears, the Flintstones, and just about every major cartoon in pop culture. June, thank you again for joining me this morning on the Saturday Morning Marquee.
Well, thank you, Hillary.
You mentioned earlier that you really didn't have to audition for many of these parts, but one part that you did lend your voice to some work was for the Flintstones as Betty Rubble. You were in the pilot of the Flintstones, if I'm correct, but then...
I just did the pilot, but they never hired me.
And do you know why, or were you told why?
I have no idea. No idea. And it hurt me because Dawes Butler wasn't hired either. It was he and I who did the pilot, and that was it.
So and then after that, you never were called back?
No, not even to audition.
But then didn't you do some more voice work on the Flintstones?
Well, I did a couple of extraneous voices, but never a regular on the Flintstones. I was busy doing Rocky and doing thousands of commercials.
Right.
So it just hurt me a little bit that I didn't get a second chance,
What is it like for you now to, sit back and watch these cartoons? Obviously, they're still airing today in reruns and,
yes,
videotapes and DVDs like you had mentioned with Rocky and Bullwinkle show. What is it like for you to sit back and still watch these
I was looking at the DVDs of Rock and Bullwinkle where I did so many different voices besides Rocky and Natasha, and I can look at it objectively instead of subjectively now and say, gee whiz, I really am a good actress. It sounds egotistical, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but the writing was so brilliant that if you are a good performer, you just couple it in with that, and it's a success. Gosh, last year I did 68 segments of Baby Looney Tunes, so Granny is still going strong, you know. She's no lady, but she's going.
So you still are doing voice work?
Right, absolutely. Last week I did a commercial as Rocky for National Park Service or something. Gosh, yeah, I'm still busy, and I'm on the board of governors of the Motion Picture Academy, and I've been on the board since 1977, and I've got 2 more years to go.
I'm Hillary Kogan speaking with Miss June Foray this morning on the Saturday Morning Marquee. Her name might not ring a bell, but you definitely, if you grew up with cartoons and have watched any cartoons, I'm sure you've run across the vocal talents of Miss June Foray. We're talking about some of the characters she's played in the past and her career. June, I've got to ask you, were there any parts that you took? I mean, one cartoon that comes across my mind would be the Smurfs. I mean, did you ever think that this cartoon of little blue creatures would come to be such a huge phenomenon that it was?
Well, you know, it started in Europe, but no, and we went for about 7 or 8 years doing the Smurfs.
And were you playing Smurfette?
No, I was Jokey Smurf. I was Jokey, and I was also Mother Nature on it. You know, she was sort of a ditzy lady, you know, but I also worked with Walter Lantz. I was Knothead and Splinter on the Woody Woodpecker series.
That's right.
And did a lot of extraneous voices, you know.
And then, of course, you were Grammy in the Gummy Bears.
Oh, Grammy Gummy, yes. I was Grammy Gummy. And I was also Ma Beagle, too.
Well, with all of these characters you've played, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, and I'm sure it's very hard for you to narrow it down, but what would be your favorite?
You know, everybody asks me that, and it's difficult to say, because, you know, there's a little part of an actor in every role he plays. Mm-hmm. And I think what people like most, what the audience likes most, are Rocky and Natasha.
And that seems to be, I mean, obviously you spent a ton of work on that show.
Yes, and it's gone into reruns so many times.
I know it must take a lot of work as a vocal actor, you know, to play these parts. Were there any characters that really caused a strain on your voice or were really hard to portray?
Not really. The worst part, well, it wasn't the worst part. If it weren't for colored pencils, you know, especially in an ensemble work, because Rocky would be saying, "Hokey smoke, haven't I seen you some words before?" "No, darling," you know, in the same breath.
Right.
So, no, it never bothered me. It's just that I had to have different colored pencils, so the timing was of the utmost importance.
Well, I mean, now with our editing machines, I didn't even think about that, because, you know, you'd think you'd do one character and stop and then go back and read the script for the other character, but you're telling me that you had to do that all in one take?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, no, we had to do it because the editing would have been just incredible. You couldn't do that.
Well, June, I have to say it's been a pleasure speaking with you this morning, and thank you for coming on the Saturday Morning Marquee. And I know that in some way all of us have grown up with you, or at least your voice in some way or another, because of all the great work that you've done and all the things you've been a part of and all of the cartoons.
Well, thank you. And the greatest thing of all was my star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Oh, yeah, that must have made you very proud.
Yes. It does.
And in what year did you get that?
In July of 2000.
And as you said, you're still doing work?
Something comes along all the time, every week or so.
Well, you keep busy, and thank you very much.
Thank you for calling me, Hillary. It was a pleasure.